Suzuka. Why do you have to be such an amazing track that nowadays really produces an amazing race? Kia ora, my name's Kimmy and I talk about Formula One in the world's second worst accent. And that is kind of the question we've been asking about a lot of circuits in the past few years, isn't it? Monaco, Imola, Singapore, the Hungaroring. There's so many tracks that so many people like for various reasons, be it the history, the setting, the layout, or a mixture of everything that mostly result in processional races that are won and lost in the pits, or are only made interesting by the intervention of a safety car, a red flag, or the weather. And that's not to say I don't enjoy a race that hinges on good strategic calls and drivers' skills managing tyres and gaps. That in itself carries its own tension. And I'm on record admitting I enjoyed the 2024 race in Monaco. However, I think the biggest, most glaring thing I learned from this year's Japanese Grand Prix is that sometimes Pirelli needs to throw in a bogey track and take an unconventional selection of tyres to a circuit that's traditionally considered tough on rubber. Or even just like quit with the sequential tyre selection. C1, C2, C3, nah, screw that. How about C1, C3, C5? Now, to be fair to Pirelli, there wasn't really any way for them to know exactly how the combination of conditions and resurfacing would affect the tyres, and it's not really feasible to ship out a few cars for a TPC run on test tyres prior to the Grand Prix weekend to get a bit of a read on it. But considering the time of year and the fact Pirelli surely has access to the specifics around how the track has been resurfaced, what type of tarmac was used, the gauge of the chip, etc., I think it's pretty fair to assume they had enough information to know it was likely to be lower deg than what we're used to seeing there. And I get that the tyre selection is also partially about safety, making sure everything's going to work well enough, not to have any random catastrophic rubber failures, blah blah woof woof, but even moving down one step may very well have forced a two-stop race that generated a bit more jeopardy than the snooze fest we ended up getting. I mean, Sainz and Lawson both made it to the end on medium soft strategies, and Sainz even finished one place ahead of where he started, which was pretty much the best anyone could hope for this past weekend. And even with a significant pace advantage, once he closed the 8 or so second gap to the next cars up the road after his stop, it then took him a pretty considerable number of laps to make it past Hulkenberg and Doohan, thanks to Hulkenberg having DRS on the Alpine. Even if changing the tyre selection does pose a risk, that's part of what practice is for. It's why teams are required to surrender 2 sets of tyres after each session. And granted, practice was a little bit truncated this weekend, but Pirelli still would have had enough data to judge whether or not they needed to tinker with the mandated tyre pressures like they did just a couple of weekends earlier multiple times in Shanghai, because that new track surface saw a significant increase in the speed cars were carrying into the corners. So what we ended up with was 20 cars out there on track pumping out push lap after push lap after push lap, only slowing down to do a bit of a recharge to try and launch what would inevitably end in another futile attempt at an overtake, and nobody being able to find the 8 tenths they needed to be able to make a pass because the field spread just was not there. So realistically, the best way to get races that have a bit more intrigue in them, you have to engineer it. This has hopefully already been done with Monaco's new mandated 2 tyre change rule, but that's a bit of an outlier as it's never going to generate that kind of tyre deg that feeds into the more strategic call than the one dictated by the rules anyway. There are things that the FIA and Pirelli can work together on to facilitate a race where it doesn't end where it started. The second thing I learned is that things have gone from cloudy with a chance of light drizzle to full-on storm brewing at McLaren. Now, in McLaren's defence, I'm not entirely convinced that what many have been saying about their strategy choices this weekend would have made much of a difference, whether that's switching the cars or putting Lando on an outlier overcut strategy. However, the fact that McLaren chose not to switch Norris and Piastri with sort of 12 to 15 or so laps to go when Oscar was consistently staying within Lando's DRS without any issue, well, I think it shows they've chosen to go with the whoever qualifies in front stays in front path when it comes to team orders. Particularly when you consider how much emphasis Oscar was putting on his qualifying position in the post-race interviews. But the point is, and sure you might say this is easy to say in hindsight, but this was a question being consistently asked throughout the race as well, there would have been very little risk in swapping Norris and Piastri and then swapping them back to give Norris another go at it if Oscar hadn't made it work. They would have had to do it early on in the second stint, but the reality is they had 20 laps, if not more, to give it a go. That's more than 2/3 of the race. Combine this with the fact that McLaren decided to play it safe and pit Lando at the same time as Max when running long and finishing on the softs was clearly an option already at that point, and I think it shows that McLaren is more interested in enforcing a status quo than taking a risk to win any particular race, which could at the end of the season be the difference between winning a championship and not. Because let's be honest, the worst that probably would have happened by trying something different with Lando is that he'd have finished third rather than second. It was pretty clear by the middle of the race that the Ferraris were severely lacking pace and the tyre deg was practically non-existent, and while there were still limited gaps to be found toward the middle of the field, the reality is if they'd left Lando out and released him to the front, he'd have had a decent chance to build enough of a gap to slot in front of Leclerc and go hunting. And unlike Sainz, who got stuck in the Doohan-Hulkenberg mini DRS train, he would have then come across a friendly all up Max's trumpet while carrying a huge tyre advantage. But of course the risk there is if Oscar really did have the pace that he thought he did, McLaren then risked winning with the wrong car. And with Oscar Piastri's new contract extension, I think this gathering storm is one that has the time and the potential to whip itself up into a full typhoon. I guess we'll just have to wait and see and make sure our pantries are well stocked with popcorn. Finally, after years of denying it, of qualifying my opinions and trying to convince myself it's the car, it's just a car, I've come to the conclusion that Max Verstappen really is probably the greatest Formula One driver we have ever seen. Yes, I love Lewis Hamilton. Yes, I know the stats don't lie. Statistically, Lewis is still the GOAT. But what Max is able to do to take a very difficult car to the limit of what it can handle, to dance it on the edge with such delicate touch and consistency, is truly something special to watch. And that, I think, is where Max shines, where the car is a challenge, where the win is hard fought, and when you can hear the emotion in his voice and know the result isn't what he or the team thought was possible. You realise you're watching greatness. You might not like Max, you might not like how, like other champions before him, he approaches racing by pushing the rules to the absolute limit and sometimes beyond. But you can't deny this guy's ability behind a wheel is very, very special. So that's my 3 things I learned from the 2025 Japanese Grand Prix. What did you take out of it? Did you fall asleep? Did you start playing a drinking game every time one of the commentary team questioned McLaren's strategic choices? Did you throw your TV out the window when Yuki got knocked out of Q2? Sound off in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like it and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more from me. You can also become a patron if that's your thing. The link's on the screen now and down in the description. And a bonus learning from Suzuka? Well, you know, even if you've got tummy trouble and are running to make the national anthem on time with a bottle of prescription strength Imodium, you're still going to get fined if you're a few seconds late. I don't know, when given the choice between a €20,000 fine and myself in a white race suit in front of an audience of millions, yeah, I'm probably going to take that fine too, Carlos.